Hi, everybody. Yat'e, She'e Emma Robbins Yinashia. This is Emma Robbins, the founder of the Chapter House, and I am so pleased to have all of you here today. As you know, we are an Indigenous art space, and one of our big missions is highlighting different Native American artists. And today we're going to be joined by Reno, who is the founder of Hashké and is an amazing designer. And we'll be asking him a couple of questions. He'll be jumping on here in a second. I just wanted to give you a little bit of background about him. And again, we'll hear more from him and see a few of his designs. But Reno Tsosie is a Diné artist and designer. He's originally from Sweetwater on the Navajo Nation. And he grew up in Cortez, Colorado, and Farmington, New Mexico, bordering the Navajo Nation. His maternal clan is Tabaha, and he is born for Tachitni. His maternal grandfather is Hashké, and his paternal grandfather is Tatnezachni. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about his past, and he will as well. But Reno comes from a line of artists. Both of his parents were artists, and growing up, he was constantly surrounded by art and culture and immersed in the ways in which we Diné people understand who we are as a nation and as a culture. He attended Stanford University, and he received a BA in American Studies while completing his initial apparel design training through the costume design program. He navigates through several worlds, two specifically that he has worked in, which is the creative and the financial sphere of the luxury fashion industry. His work has appeared on the runway during New York Fashion Week under the houses of Dennis Basso and Jay Mendel. He's also an alumnus of Neiman Marcus's Executive Development Program and has had a very successful career on their leadership track. His line and his brand, Hashké, brings together all of his experience as a Navajo artist and businessman with a mission to share his culture with the world. Today, Hashké supports a small group of creators and artisans, but tomorrow it is his mission to bring jobs and economic diversity back to the Navajo Nation, something that really sets him apart from other designers and something that I'm really looking forward to diving in with him. He is actually joining us from Dallas, Texas today, and so I want to bring him in here. Thank you, Reno, for taking the time to speak with us this evening. I really appreciate it.
Hi there. Yes, of course. I'm happy to be here.
So, Reno, I know we have a lot to talk about, but is there anything that I missed out on that you want to fill us in on here?
No, I think that's spot on. I wish I could have that kind of introduction myself when I introduce myself. No, I think that was very spot on, and I'm just happy to kind of begin to share my story here.
Yeah, I mean, you've had actually just a really great story that came out in the Navajo Times, and I think I personally learned a lot about it, and I'm going to make sure that we include this here for our viewers to read themselves. But like I said, you are coming from a really interesting world and a really interesting background, and I just have a couple questions that will get us started, and we'll just kind of kick off from there organically.
Okay, wonderful. Sounds great.
Cool. So I want to begin talking about Hashké's mission. And, again, it's twofold, which is deeply rooted in your Diné culture. I say our Diné culture, being Navajo myself. Number one, it's your goal to create menswear specifically that draws from Navajo culture and that shares the Navajo journey through artistic storytelling. And then number two, you want to create an ecosystem of Indigenous creators and again, bring jobs back to the res, which is like one of the big things that really stuck out about your work to me. Can you elaborate on how you do that in the design and the production of your work and where this is right now and where you see this moving forward?
Yeah, so kind of with the first point of design, where I wanted to design menswear and to kind of do this cultural storytelling, because I think that kind of my own understanding of our culture and kind of how is introduced to it is through stories. That there is a lot of meaning in that. Every experience and every connection, that there's some story associated with it, and it's just it's just great to have this knowledge and to hear about it from all of my teachers and all of my elders and my family members to kind of carry this on. And it's in my head, and it's like, in a very with Navajo being a very oral tradition, it's, there is no really depiction of what it looks like, of what any of these cultural stories looks like, or kind of even when my relatives tell stories of kind of what it was like when they were growing up too. I can kind of paint a picture in my head, but it's all passed down through storytelling. And I thought, okay, how can I translate how I see this and how I interpret this into something physical and something tangible? And of course, I'm not the first one to do this. There's plenty of of Navajo artists who've done this for generations, with weavers, silversmithers, for all sorts of wonderful artisans out there. And I decided to do something that I haven't quite seen, which was menswear. And I enjoy menswear mainly because, as a Diné male, like I find out there aren't a whole lot of options that I feel like are for me, or that I feel like kind of speak to my aesthetic of, I would love to be able to wear something that I feel closer to my culture and closer to who I am, but without necessarily feel like, I'm going to go and like ride on top of a pickup truck in the middle of Navajo Nation Fair or something. But kind of with that, I wanted to kind of make something that is new and something that's kind of modern and something that's more contemporary, is what I like to call it. Just something that's for every day, something that we as Navajo men and the men leading aesthetic can actually just integrate in our everyday lives so easily. And then for the second part of kind of my goal to take this back to the Navajo Nation, I have a small operation. I work with a production team here in Dallas, and the whole process of creating Hashké is working with artists, working with creators, with photographers, with models, with graphic designers, and to be able to communicate, what I'm designing in this vision, but to also kind of support them too. And I know that's, as someone who was in New York as a designer starting out, I've certainly encountered a lot of people who were just working for free. And it's like, I knew when I told myself whenever I started my own thing that, like, no, you are going to pay people, you're going to support people for what they do, because there's so much talent out there, and it's, to me, it's unreasonable to expect anyone to work for free just for exposure or anything. So for me, like, I love being able to support all the people that I work with, and to be able to work towards this kind of like sustainability and this kind of like economic model where we are all in this community, and it's like community wealth building together. And I would love to take that idea and take it back to the Navajo Nation, because to run a fashion business, there's so many components of manufacturing, marketing, online, e-commerce, logistics that can definitely be a different avenue for people to come back and work on the Navajo Nation. I know for young people like myself, there aren't a whole lot of options currently today, but I would definitely love to change that.
I was just talking and I was muted there. Thank you for sharing that. It's super important to hear that, because I think, the Navajo Nation is a sovereign nation. And, if we were a state, we would be the 10th largest. And there are so many people there who are talented and who need jobs. And it's not just like these opportunities come very often. So I love that. Can you talk actually a little bit more about that? Like, why it is so important to bring these jobs back to the res, and why, I'm a big fan of projects that are for Indigenous, by Indigenous peoples. And you really touched on that. Although I will say there's nothing wrong with wanting to dress like you're riding on a pickup truck during the in a way that's my aesthetic. I'm joking. But yeah, can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, definitely. So I love the idea of being able to build something out of our community back home. I think that there's so much potential in terms of the land that's available, the resources, the talent, and also the energy too. That there's plenty of talented artists, creators, and professionals who just love doing what they do. But unfortunately, there isn't a place for them to really go. There, even physical places itself, there aren't a whole lot of commercial, what would be equivalent of commercial real estate to kind of come in in and to create spaces for people to actually start and grow these businesses. So in my view, it's kind of like I want to be able to at least initiate that, and I think that I'm working on starting this model where it is sustainable, where I can actually bring people back and bring them together to be able to do what they love to do and be able to do it for such an organization that just is more interested in creating community wealth rather than just profit, 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 money, money, money. I'm the only winner at the end.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's something too, like, I just want to touch on, I am also an artist, right? Like, I'm not a fashion designer like yourself. But it's something that I think, especially as Native peoples, that it's time that we stand up and say, you need to pay me for my craft, and you need to pay me for my art, and you need to pay me for my intellectual property. And that's actually sort of how you and I had connected originally. Was I've been a big fan of your work for a while.
Thank you.
I've shared your work. Yeah. I mean, it's so cool because, you may not know it, but I've known about you for a couple of years because my sister for several years now. But I think it's just really important now that we stand up and say, we need to get paid. This is what we are. This is who we are. And it's just something so important that I always pass along to other people, because it's like, as artists or as artisans or as designers, whatever we are, we're often told, well, your work is creative, and so it's not really a commodity, and you shouldn't get paid for that. And I think that's something that it's really important that we continue to tell ourselves and to share that information as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, as Native people, I think we understand the value of artwork in our everyday lives. We understand living with something that's so beautiful and to be able to integrate it. It's in my everyday life, it's not something I view as separate. Like, to me, like, artwork in my own home isn't just like it's the artwork on the wall. No, it's the artwork that I live with. It's something that is part of who I am and part of my everyday life that I it's hard to even assign a value to it because it means so much to me. And to kind of I completely agree with kind of the idea of being as Native people speaking up and to say yes, that we need to be paid for what we produce, and that there's in a way that it doesn't just cover the cost of materials, but to cover the idea behind it, because there's so much power in what we create, and there's so much meaning and symbolism behind it too, and that has value in itself. That I think that we definitely need to take a stand for, and to say hey, this has value to it.
Yeah, no, it's so real. And to anybody who's watching this, make sure you're getting paid for your work, because that's
yes,
important. So yeah, I definitely want to talk a little bit more about why you chose menswear specifically. I've read something that you've said before, which is you've talked about healthy masculine sensibilities and portraying masculinity, which is something that's really interesting. I think specifically being a Diné male and coming from such a matriarchal culture. And also, like you said, something that's made for someone like yourself or as a Native male or whatever that looks like. So could you talk a little bit more about why you chose to create menswear?
Yeah, no, I can definitely speak to that. And I think I should probably kind of clarify by kind of what I mean by Navajo inspired or Native cultivated type menswear. And I use the term menswear rather than kind of male apparel because in my experience and my understanding of our culture, as well as the idea of what Hashké is Hashké is not necessarily male, female, gender specific, but it is something that can, it crosses the full spectrum of that Hashké is a lot of the more emotions associated with masculinity that can lean towards anger, empowerment, strength, self-determination. But although those feelings shouldn't be isolated just to the male gender per se, but it's kind of that idea does carry across into men, into women, and any and any of individuals across the spectrum. And that's what I love about the idea of Hashké in our cultural teachings, is that it is something that we have, that's something available, that's a part of who we are as human beings. But it's what do we do with that raw emotion, and how do we use that to actually help our our communities rather than to destroy it. And I just love the idea of taking that idea of healthy masculinity to actually, create spaces for people rather than to just be very selfish about it.
Yeah, no, I love that. I mean, I think it's something that is really important to bring up because with everything that's going on across the spectrum of gender, we need to have these conversations, and especially in fashion. I think one of the things that's really new for me, like I'm 34, and when I was growing up, we didn't have gender identification. And it's not that we didn't have it, it's that it wasn't commonly spoke of. And so I love that the youth nowadays, really, I mean, everybody, like we're starting to have those conversations about what is healthy and, supporting one another and how gender influences who we are and how it doesn't, because it isn't a defining factor of every single thing. So I love that. But related to gender, I've read that you've spoken about your mother before, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about, again, we're coming from a matriarchal society, and wanted to hear you speak a little bit about the influences that Diné women have had in your work and how you see them playing into a menswear line as well.
Yeah. Okay. This is very exciting for me to speak about. Yeah, because a really big influence in who I am as an artist is because of my mother, as well as my sister who continues to weave. Including that my sister, my mother, my grandmother, her mother, our family comes from a long line of master weavers, and it's just like awe-inspiring, in my opinion, to kind of think like, wow, this is something that's been carried down through tradition, through something that, like, it's just not the idea of the craft itself, but it's the stories behind it. Well, what is the baton mean? How does the nanolje get put on? What is this whole process, and what does it mean? And for us as Diné people to go through this process, because it's not just a task in itself, it is a process that kind of like helps shapes who we are. And I think for me, that when I saw my mother create, kind of like her life and her experiences ended up in her weavings. It's like, it's not necessarily like, the idea of I'm going to create this because it looks nice. It's like, that I'll speak frankly, it's been tough. That's for her to how can I say that, like, how does something like let me kind of reset when I say this, but I'll go ahead and be frank in that my mother was killed because of domestic violence from my father, and kind of how leading up to that, I remember how has her weavings changed? How does the tension changed? How has the colors changed? How does this life experience of that we have as human beings, how does that kind of just fuse into our art, and kind of how does our environment kind of fuse into that? And I just remember growing up and seeing that type of trauma and abuse take place, but how was my mother able to create something so beautiful out of something that she worked at every single day? To me is tremendous. And I think as a native person who's alive here in 2020, I will admit there is a lot of trauma. There's a lot of things that I think about in terms of, like, where's our culture going? Where is our language going? Where are we going as a nation? That there's a lot of, I feel like, inherent trauma as Native people that we live through, just being alive here and being, like, in a way, survivors of our ancestors. But how do we kind of take that and to really, like, build upon it and to create something that's new and something that's really reflective of our experience? So, but I remember being very inspired by my mother, as well as my sister too, in terms of the strength and power that they had, the conviction that they carried in their artwork, and even who they were as people, standing up for themselves and to stand up for what they believed in, and standing up for family as well. And to me, that's the most powerful thing, and is in terms of, using that strength, that power to really, protect people in your family, protect your community, and to be a leader for everyone.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. That's not something that I knew about. And it means a lot that you could share that with us, because these are real issues that Native peoples face. And it's something that I think, for me, when I'm thinking about trauma personally and I'm creating, it's something that really helps me work past it, and not only work through my own emotions, but educate people and also demonstrate to others, like, this is something that you can do too. So thank you for sharing that. Um, do you ever do any collaborations with your sister right now?
Currently, I don't, but I think I would love to in the future. I feel like my sister's in a whole another league than me. Like, I look at her artwork and I just think, like, wow, I mean, she is 9 years older than I am, but she started weaving at a very young age, and I just and the way that she just does it so seamlessly. It's just like I'm honestly inspired whenever I go home and she's sitting at the loom, and she's sitting at, that's not her job. Her job is working in education and working like a full day job hours, and then to come home and sit down and to weave for even more hours. Like, to me, it's like, wow, like that is amazing. That is like, and for her just to go, like, it's I feel like maybe in the future, but not quite yet. And I feel like kind of I would love to, but I don't have anything planned right now.
That's really great. Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and do like the cheesy dad pun here and say, like,
Okay.
I'm sure that y'all could weave something in with each other's work.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Well, it's really great that you come from like a line of artists, and I think that is something that's really amazing to think about, how it's always surrounded you. And again, thank you for sharing that past.
Hmm.
Um, so let's talk a little bit about what Hashké means. Obviously,
Yeah.
I know that it's one of your middle names, but could
Hmm.
you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So Hashké is one of my middle names. Um, I remember this. Well, I remember asking many years later when I was when I was in my adult years with my sister, of as to why I have the name that I do. So my full name is Reno Hashké Tsosie. And I remember my sister told me that when I was a baby, like after I was born, my name wasn't quite fully finalized yet, but I would just be in my cradle board and I'd just be screaming at the top of my lungs, just like, nah, ah! um, and then and my family said that, like, yeah, that's the scream of a warrior that's in the making. And that's kind of how I got attached. That's how Hashké became part of my name. And coming to know as an adult as exactly what it means has a lot of multi-layered meaning that I'm certainly proud of, because like for like my understanding of Hashké is, a lot of those, as I mentioned earlier, those masculine leaning type emotions of strength, of anger, of self-determination, to be able to actually use those kind of more powerful emotions and to be able to use them for in a positive way. And I kind of wanted to be able to take the idea of that, of creating menswear, and to be and I think it's very appropriate that I'm using that idea in my brand name at the same time while I'm also wanting to empower Native communities, and to be able to actually, to create this space where people can create, where people can contribute, where I'm helping to support them. Because this is something that I believe that that I think is definitely kind of missing out there, in terms of like, how do you lift everyone up? How do you create like a business that really does bring everyone who's around you up with you at the same time? And that's why I've really decided on the name Hashké when I was deciding on what I would call this operation.
You're so cool. I love talking to you. These are such like important things, and really big elements of what the chapter house is about, right? Like, uplifting each other and coming together and having these conversations. So I'm really happy that you're our like first guest technically.
Thank you.
So I actually want to talk a little bit more about your collection, which is Northern Travels at Dusk. And we're going to pull up a few pictures here so that viewers can see a little bit about this. But I just want you to tell us a little bit about where this has taken you, where it started. You know, I know this is fairly new. But yeah, why don't you just take us away?
Yeah, so I can this collection, it's born out of a lot of things for me, really, because I think whenever I look for inspiration, I look through it in nature a lot. And I in my free time, I try to go hiking, I go camping, I go backpacking out, out in the Southwest, go down dirt roads. And I just love being in one-on-one with nature in that way. And just, there's something about it that's just so like you just feel close to it. Like you feel more closer just to who you are as a person. And I just love that kind of like feeling and capturing that emotion with it. And with Northern Travels at Dusk, I reflected on the idea of walking around and traveling in the evening and into the nighttime on the more northern regions of our homeland. And I love the idea of that, because I know in our culture, a lot of the associations, there's a lot of associations kind of with the four directions, and with the North, it being the more leaning more towards the more cold regions, the more colder emotions, and I kind of took the idea of that, of how does this translate into the time that we are living in? Because right now there's a lot of uncertainty in to be able to understand that, like, how do I take the idea of self-doubt and uncertainty and a lot of questioning of one's own skill and abilities, but then you look towards nature to be able to empower yourself for that. So I found that a lot in walking around our home up in the North, and and something that I love to share with people who are not from the Southwest or not from the res, is that our reservation is so diverse. Like, we have so many different types of landscapes and landforms. It's not just, the Windows XP Monument Valley picture that's there. We have ponderosa pines, spruce trees, aspens, we have deep canyons, we have lakes, we have so much that's available, and we have like the most beautiful sky that's available to you at any time of the day. And that's something I wanted to be able to draw inspiration from. That this gives me strength. This gives me a reason to be able to continue on, to overcome that self-doubt, because I see such beauty and strength in this area that I travel to up north, in an area that's typically a little bit more harsher and a little bit more colder compared to the other three directions.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that background. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of the pieces from this collection. And I don't know if you want to give us any rundowns here, but I think it was really nice to sort of hear that explanation and see the photos beforehand, because I really, after I had seen the photos before and after hearing your explanation even just now, thinking about the materials that you used really shifted for me. And so I'd love to hear if there's anything that you want to talk about with these shirts that you've made. And they're so beautiful, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Yes. So actually, funny thing is, I actually decided on the buttons before I still selected the fabrics, because I originally fell in love with this kind of like shell button from these seashells, but given that they're probably, they ended up being like $10 per button, which is not really sustainable for like a men's shirt that I want people to buy. So I found this alternative, this resin alternative that I think mimics it very well. But for me, that really instilled in me, like, I love the idea of like having these more natural looking materials. Like to me, like, if I'm gonna be drawing inspiration from something from the natural land, I should try to make it that association as close as possible. So with these fabrics, you know, they're all 100% cotton, except for one that has a little bit of a spandex stretch in it. But these fabrics, I made sure were complete top quality, and that they do press well, that they do lay well, and that they do have that they're very well constructed as well. So for each individual piece, when I talk about storytelling, is that, you know, something I would see in my experience in fashions, with some collections, you know, what's kind of more typical is, oh, here's the general inspiration, and then now there's 80 pieces that kind of fit in that sentence or that kind of like picture of like of what the inspiration is. But for me, I thought, like, I'm going to create every single piece that's related to this idea that I want to create. Like, what is the connection of each individual piece? You know, it's not just everything's just loosely kind of, oh, the colors are generally the same, the materials are generally the same, but it's like, no, I created each individual piece for a reason. So for something like this, for the Canyon Dust short sleeve shirt, like, I love the idea of, you know, as a kid when you're playing, you know, like playing in the rocks, playing in the canyons, that the sun's going down, and all of a sudden, like, the really bright orange of the rocks change, you know, and they change around with you. And I tried to find a fabric, and I think I found it here, where like the natural folds of it does change. It has like a certain type of sheen to it. It's not orange, it's not rust, it's not brown, but it's but it changes with the lighting as well. And I thought, this is perfect, because this is how I see and understood the rocks back home, up in the north, kind of like the more you know, more like Kayenta, Blanding, Bluff kind of area too. Of, you know, this is what I see, and this is what I would love to communicate to people. Like, you know, it's just not just this. It's not as obvious to see, and so I love to be able to share that in my creations. And I think something you'll notice as well is that, you know, I kind of. It is very intentional. I stray away from the more like traditional motifs that are normally seen in Navajo artwork, and I speak of kind of like the step pattern, a lot of more of like this the concha belt kind of things, because like for me, like, I love the idea of creating something directly from nature, and thinking the idea of like, okay, like, what would have our ancestors have done in terms of creating? You know, like, we didn't always have silver. We never always had turquoise. We didn't always have sheep. So, you know, how do we take these materials that are contemporary and make them more for that's in line with who we are and how we see the world as Native people? And that's something I really try to do in my work, is to create, you know, what are the elements and foundations of Navajo design, and kind of like how do I embrace new technology, new techniques to be able to add on to our understanding of Navajo design.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing a lot of things here that really resonate with, you know, myself, but also who we are as the Neh people, and this idea of geographical location, and like what you mentioned with silver and turquoise and the different technologies that we've had. You know, the Spaniards have played such a big influence on the type of fashion that we have as Navajos, from everything, right? Like the type of skirts that women wear, or even sheep and wool and different things like that. And so I really love what you're saying about that. And, you know, again, what you had said, which I was sort of cracking up there about, is there is so much diversity in the Southwest, and there's so much diversity on the res. You know, where you and I are from, we're probably like 3 hours away from each other, 4 hours away from each other. And even just now, when you're talking about that brown, I'm like, this is very specific to the northeastern part of the res, or to a certain part, because where I'm from, it's a different type of red. You know, I think building off of that, like with geographical locations, it actually seems like it has a lot to do with who you are, not only as a Navajo, but also as a fashion designer, and as someone who was a student, and someone who is now in Texas, as we said. You know, you've obviously lived both on and off the reservation, and you've lived on the West Coast, and you lived on the East Coast, and now you're somewhere in the middle in Texas. And so can you tell us a little bit about how this plays into your life and your work, and what it's like to be an artist and a designer in Dallas, Texas? That's so interesting to me.
Yeah, Yeah, definitely. I think, for me, I'm always pro living in different places and to really get a different experience, understand how different people live, and then like why do people think the way that they do and why do they decide to live the way that they do? And I think I've seen so many different types of people when I was out in California, when I was living in New York, and even here in Texas, like understanding the perspectives that people have, the opinions that they have, and even the questions. I think for me, the most interesting thing is the questions, because especially like as a essentially a brown person living here in the United States, I travel somewhere, I was in California, people mistake me for Filipino. When I was in New York, people thought I was Hispanic, but it's like, I always have to say like, no, I am Navajo. Not, it's kind of an interesting thing, at least for me, because I don't say, oh, I'm Native American. I say I am Navajo. And if someone doesn't know what that is, I'd say, oh, well, we are a people indigenous to this land, from the southwestern United States, New Mexico areas. I give them the whole like tour guide information, of who we are and where we come from. But I think it's happened to me for so long, and it's so frequent. I have an idea of like, you know, of who. I mean, I've always have had an idea of who I am and why I have the opinions I do, why I see the world in the way I do, why I, decide to, always try to like, have a beautiful life and like beauty before me. But how do I tell someone what that is? How do I describe to someone exactly like what does that mean? Does that matter? And I think for me, the easiest way to communicate that is visually, to be able to pair something that's visual along with storytelling, to be able to say like, this is who I am, why I have these views, where I come from, and to be able to communicate that. And I feel like I've done that so long for so often that I feel like it's really been able to sharpen my abilities as a communicator of who I am and of our people as well, to really share it in an accurate but also respectful way, to actually say like, this is who we are.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's really great, and I'm totally with you. I am a strong believer of moving around when you can, if you can. Um, and it is really cool to set that example again, because I think being res kids, we know that it's really hard to leave the res sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
which we'll talk a little bit about here in a second. But so you and I actually have pretty similar jobs, right? Like we're both artists, but we also have day jobs to a certain extent. Um, and day jobs that are helping people. And you actually have a very important job outside of your fabulous designing. So, can you tell us a little bit about what you do when you're not designing or making or creating?
Yeah. So I am an EMT on an ambulance here for one of the 911 systems here in the Dallas area. So if you don't quite know what that means, like if someone calls 911 and there's a medical emergency, I'm one of the people that shows up. So it's a very I mean, it is completely 100% rewarding experience, but it's also it can be very mentally exhausting too. But for me, that's something I knew going into this, because I always call it my old life. In my old life, when I used to work more of the corporate, fashion, financial, analytics side, I remember being at my desk and opening the millions Excel spreadsheet and thinking to myself, I wish I could do more. I wish I could help more. I wish I could have so many more one-on-one experiences, at least right now at this stage of my life, because the way that I thought about it was, I am a young 20 something, fully physically capable young man. And, I want to go help people. What's something that I can do at this stage of my life that will make an impact? And I remember I went on a jog here in Texas, and it was one of those days too, because like in Texas it gets really hot. I think it was like 110 degrees or something. With like some humidity. And I remember I went around the corner of this block and someone was just hit by a car, like maybe 5 seconds before I got there, and they were laying there, and I just was like, I don't know what to do. I don't. There's nothing. Like I was like the first or second person who was not involved that was there. And I just remember the ambulance crew, like they came out, they jumped out, they did everything they can, they, you know, and they went off with them. And I just thinking to myself, like, I I feel like, you know, that's something that I would want to do. And it's not necessarily, you know, I feel like I don't want to mistake it for like a hero complex. You know, I don't want to go in. You could, you know, it's funny in EMT school. You know, they say like, yeah, like, you know, like you want to be the Heisman Trophy. You know, like go deliver the baby and just, you know, kind of like go save the day. But I think for me, it's like the more one-on-one experience is very rewarding for me because, you know, we I transport and interact with so many different types of people with so many different types of backgrounds and walks of life. And it's, to me, it's just part of this living experience to see different people in so many different ways. And it's very eye-opening to see like who lives in your community and kind of like who is around you and what are these things, you know, like how do you really people that you don't necessarily, you know, how I'll give an example. You know, like just the other day, you know, we were called for a medical emergency, and this person had all sorts of like, you know, white power, white supremacist tattoos on them, and it's kind of like, you know, I'm there to like help them because they're in a medical emergency, and you know, like how do we, you know, how, and interacting with this person was a completely nerve wracking, but it's also a unique experience for me because it's like, you know, I came into this job knowing that I wanted to go and help people and make an impact. And this is this is an experience where it's like, okay, this is someone that I will always have to pull 100% give my best to as well, no matter what they think of me as a human being. And it's because I don't know. I wish I could say more about it's exactly why I love doing this, at least for now. But it is something I always tell myself. You know, once you stop enjoy doing this, then you know you can stop and return back to what yeah.
To the old life.
Back, I don't know, back to the
Yeah.
old life.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I feel like I'm talking in circles
No, I totally
in a way. Yeah.
But I have a very similar background. I'm not doing as extreme work as you are, and I just want to say thank you for all of that. I imagine, especially during COVID, it's a lot that's going on right now. But thank you for sharing that because I think there's sort of this commonality with the work that you're making outside of your EMT work, which is, you know, you're there to help people and it's really influencing how you tell stories and how you experience life. And I think that's really admirable. So thank you so much for that EMT work and for sharing that. I think, you know, it's definitely something that I hope that you're taking care of yourself and taking some time to like chill out because it can be a lot, I imagine.
Yeah, definitely. And I just remember, I mean, you know, there's the great book, you know, Scalpel and the Silver Bear, you know, kind of like, you know, going into something that's so, it really kind of like comes into like yourself, your well-being, and it's like rubbing against like who you are, seeing some of these very tough situations, like seeing people, you know, who are, you know, because if you're calling 911, you know, it is probably one of the worst days of your life, and to come into that, and you know, it honestly does, you know, wear away at me to kind of, you know, it does have a certain text on it as well, but I think kind of I always lean back on like, you know, like what our culture is, and a lot of it is strength, a lot of it's in beauty, a lot of it is aligning our thoughts in a way that keeps us centered and to keep us, you know, to keep moving forward and to be able to, you know, to have that strength to go on every single day and to be able to contribute back. You know, that's what I always feel like gives me a lot of power is whenever I think of all of my ancestors, all of my family members who have gone through pain, trauma, and adversity, and kind of like, I can do this. I can do this too.
No, thank you for sharing that. So I just have a few more questions here. I want to be respectful of your time. And so, you know, you and I both know that as Navajo people and as Indigenous people overall, we are very creative. It's like in our blood, it's in our DNA, it's who we are. Like we've talked about this throughout this evening. And so, you know, oftentimes, as we discussed, there aren't a lot of opportunities on the reservation. And it seems like also artists who come from wealthier backgrounds or designers might sort of have an easier time breaking into the arts or the fashion scene. And I think many of us from the res don't have huge bank accounts, right? And like, as someone who's gone to art school, you know, I see this from the very beginning. It's not just like, you get into a gallery space and all of a sudden it's like, okay, I'm rich, I can do whatever I want. But with that said, what advice do you have for people who want to follow your footsteps?
Yeah, I think definitely what's helped me the most is getting out there and asking for help, and to be able to be comfortable putting yourself out there, receiving good feedback, and creating your team, like creating team you in a way. And I think one of my mentors put it together very well, because I grew up, I lost both of my parents as a teenager, so kind of like, who do I look towards? And because a lot of my family members, you know, we're geographically very far away, and of course, you know, it was over 10 years ago, so not every single person had a phone. I certainly didn't always have a phone, but so kind of like, you know, how do you create community? How do you create this team? How do you create this family that's always going to support you? And, you know, how do you select people in your life that you know is going to add to it, and that will help you along the way? And I think that's something that I definitely advocate for, is people to find, you know, for young people to find a mentor and to find a community that really helps support them, to give them ideas, to give them strength, to even give them the motivation. I know I remember when like for example, I remember when I was working on starting Hashké, and kind of I hit a wall that was a little bit hard to overcome for a few months, and I just set Hashké down off to the side and just said, like, okay, I'll pick it back up whenever something happens, whatever that means. But I remember having a conversation with one of my very good friends, who's also an artist too, and just our conversation that day really lit a fire in me in terms of like, I can do this. This is achievable. Like, you know, like, and I told my friend, like, thank you for that conversation we had that one day, because that really was like the day that I needed to really push the snowball down the hill to really get everything going. And I'm really glad, because, you know, had I not have that that support and motivation, you know, Hashké might have still be on the sidelines for right now, but I'm really glad to have that community that I was able to shape around me.
That's a really great answer. And again, anyone who's watching this who wants to follow in Reno's footsteps, listen to him, because that's very important. You know, I think asking for help is something that can be difficult, but even these conversations spark those ideas. You know, hopefully somebody will say, well, I have my Hashké version and I want to make this happen, because it is really easy to tell ourselves, well, I don't have the finances, or I don't have the time, or I don't have this, and so I'm not going to do it. And I just want to say, again, to all you artists watching this, remember, you are worth something. Your time is worth something. Get paid, get that shmoney, but also make sure to ask for help and understand that there are a lot of us out there who have been in the same boat as you have and who are there to help you. So thank you for sharing that, Reno.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, no, I feel like I just want everyone to be successful, and I see plenty of so many talented people who put what they're truly passionate about on the side, and I just wish I could meet every single one of them, and I tell them, like, you can do this, you can, you know, like if you want to, you know, like, this can be the thing that you do. This is, you know, this can be who you are. This is how you can make your mark in the lives around you. Because I believe in you. Because and I think as creative people, you know, we kind of are very self-critical of our own work, and we think like, oh, it's not good enough. Oh, no one will buy this. Oh, it's too expensive. Oh. And when it's like, no, like, I think having that support and having that guidance and that community around you really helps to give you strength whenever you have those thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I just have 3 more questions here.
Okay.
So one is, how has COVID shifted the way that you work, if it has at all?
Yes. Well, yes. Like I think, like most things, everything has to be virtual now. And I remember when I was going to be started this first collection, I had these grand plans of I'm going to go to the fabric shows in L.A., in New York. I'm going to go to these showrooms in Miami. I'm going to go all these places, meet all these people, make all those connections. What they tell you, I guess, that you do in the business world or so. But that's not happening. So I really had to kind of go and think of like, how can I, because they're like here in Dallas, it's not necessarily a garments hub. Uh, so how do I kind of start those conversations of connecting with people where there are garment hubs to get samples, to get those fabric books, to get kind of materials and to make that happen. And I think really kind of like what helped me along that process is honestly like just being very upfront and very forward of like, hi, my name is Reno, I am Navajo, I am creating this Navajo inspired menswear line, and this is kind of like what it will look like. This is kind of who it's geared towards, and I don't know exactly everything, and I don't have everything that I need to make this right now. But can you help me? Or at least if you can't help me, can you direct me to someone who might help me? And honestly, that actually like works. Like, I remember talking to a few fabric people and be like, oh, so you only have fabrics for curtains or like upholstery. Do you know someone who makes like cottons that are for fabric weight for men's shirting? And it's like, and they'll be like, oh yeah, I know this guy, I know this girl, I know this person, to make those connections. And to be able to do that virtually, I think has been something that's very new for me, because it's like, it's going in person, be able to tell the story, to like to say hello to someone, to actually make those connections, is very different to be able to do that through email or on the phone. So, they say that you need to have your 30-second elevator pitch. And I think I've had to really refine mine down to a sharp point, so I can communicate it very quickly to those that I meet and those that I'm interacting with. But I think that's something that's very unique, in my opinion, to the pandemic is that people really do want something that's special, that feels like it has meaning. And I say that, like currently there is a retail apocalypse. There's so many stores that are closing, so many clothing stores, retailers that are shutting their doors, and it's like, why is this happening? Is it they don't have the right product, they don't have the right story, they don't have, and the answer is yes, it's all of those things. Like, I think that's something that's been really missing in the shopping experience is, like having that specialty to it, communicating like, as an artist, as a creator, I created this and I'm going to share this with you. And, how do you even begin to have that specialty to it if you don't even have that specialty and drive from the very beginning? When you're looking for the buttons, the zippers, the fabrics, how can you just make up the significant story at the very end when you never really had it in the beginning to start with? So for me, I think what's shaped my business and what I've done differently is like, it's not just numbers. It's not just like, oh yeah, I'm going to, meet a fabric person, I'm going to order 100 or so yards. It's like, hey, I'm creating this. I need to find a fabric that communicates the idea of the sun going down in canyon walls. Do you have something that kind of looks like this? It's like a rust. It's like a kind of like a red in a way. And that kind of really helps shape kind of how I do business, at least from from the aspect of the manufacturing and the production. But in terms of the actual like customer facing side, being able to communicate my story in a digital format it's probably one of the most important things, because I think that I wish I could go out in person to shows, or to go out to fairs, or to go out to out there people and tell them this story directly with my mouth and my energy, but I can't. I have to be able to use it through words, through visuals, through this idea of like, how do I communicate what is Hashké? Because even in my perspective, like Hashké, it's a very layered meaning, but to someone who doesn't even quite know what Hashké is or even understand like the intricacies of Diné culture, how do you communicate this in a way that makes sense? And so I think for me, it's been a lot of messaging and communication that I've really had to refine, that I probably wouldn't have had to do as much had the pandemic not occurred.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I think with that said, so my next question related to COVID is, because you are a very fashionable person yourself. Obviously, look at your shirt. You look, and we talk about communication and how things have shifted for us. For the chapter house, our big plans were, well, we're going to get a brick and mortar space. And the thing that's been really beautiful is by having to switch to being a digital space and a virtual space, we get to have these conversations across the country and connect with Native peoples who are not in the same physical space as we are. And so with that said, communications and fashion, what advice do you have in terms of style and fashion that you can offer those of us who are behind a camera or behind Zoom? And what do we do to like jazz up our masks? What can you help us out with here?
I think for me, like even if you aren't necessarily fashionable, I think the way that you take care of yourself definitely makes a big difference. I'll be honest, I wear sunscreen in the summer because like I want to protect my skin, and it's kind of funny because like I've shared things on Instagram and people are like, oh, what filter did you use? And I'm just like, that's just how I look. Like I didn't use Facetune or anything on my cheeks or anything. That's just my complexion that I have. But I think that's like taking care of your skin is very important with that. But just taking care of yourself, just like being in the right mindset, waking up and feeling like, yes, I have the motivation to be here today. And I think that definitely translates very much so in the digital aspect of like, we will be in a conference call with 20 other people and you kind of be like, oh, that person kind of looks like they have had a rough start, like you notice those things, but it's like, wow, like I wish I had that person's energy right now, or that person's just like conviction right now. And it's just, all part of taking care of yourself.
No, I love that. I think that won't make me feel so bad then, because people can't see the sweatpants that I have on down here. Okay, so I know we're running out of time here. So what I want to end with is, where can we learn more about your work? How do we follow you? And what new projects does Hashké and Reno Tsosie have coming up?
Yes. Okay, so you can follow me on my website, hashké.com. You can follow me on my social media on Facebook and on Instagram. I probably share more frequently on Instagram than Facebook. So on Instagram, I do both like the feed and stories as well, but I also interact too. I've done a few interactions and with people who follow me. They say like, "Hey, this looks amazing," and I'm like, "Oh, thank you so much," or like, "Hey, I'm excited for my order." I'm like, "I'm so excited I got to send it off to you." So I'm definitely pro interaction. If you send me a message, I will respond. I feedback has been absolutely amazing, and I love that. And in terms of projects. So a project right now, because it's, we are, what I've created is an apparel company, and I really do want to expand the assortment. So right now we do have men's shirting, but my specialty when I was in New York was outerwear. And I, in my personal life, I love outerwear. Like I just love buying different types of jackets, filling my closet, all sorts of things. So that's something I would love to be able to introduce, is different types of outerwear, whether it's rainwear, even things transitioning into the springtime season, kind of more pieces that are more transitional, as they say. But that's kind of what I'm having in the works right now. As well as looking at developing a few kind of more accessories that are more appropriate for the springtime. And TBD as kind of like what that will be, but I'm excited to be working on that.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And again, everybody make sure to check out Reno on Facebook, but Instagram is where he's most active. You can see his information here. And then again, on his website, I'm so excited that we got to talk to you, Reno. And I know you have so many amazing things. Yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to continuing to keep up with you. And, you don't have to give a gift on Christmas Day for those of you who celebrate, or for those of you who want to give a gift during the holiday season. So if you don't order it in time to get it there with USPS or whatever shipping method Hashké uses, remember, you can always send a gift later. So thank you so much, Reno. And I just want to say it's been such a pleasure, and I'm going to give you a round of applause here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here and that I got to share my story and kind of everything I've worked on with you. And it's amazing to me that I feel like, 2-3 years ago, this was just an idea that a conversation I loosely had with one of my mentors. And today it's like, wow, I'm actually sending something I've created out into the world. And that, to me, that's powerful and amazing.
Yes. So everybody, thank you so much. Reno, you're amazing. Please make sure to follow the Chapter House on social media as well, and to keep up with amazing artists like Reno and his line and design and brand of Hashké. So Ahiahet, and I really appreciate all of you. And please stay safe out there. Reno, I wanted to end by showing you this ridiculous mask that I bought.
Oh, I love that.
So everybody make sure to wear your masks. I don't know
my gosh.
medical grade, but this will just be in my house for conversations with Reno. Everybody stay safe and happy holidays from the Chapter House. Thank you.
Thank you.